Before I read the text for today, I'd like to have you imagine the scene and the setting a little bit first. It's less than a week before the Passover celebration begins in Jerusalem. So people from far and near are making their journey to Jerusalem. They do this every year to celebrate a holy day, a celebration. The streets are filled with these traveling families. Their babies crying, perhaps. Their donkeys braying. There are the smells of the fragrant foods that people are making around campfires and the sounds of the voices of the people who are gathered around those campfires. You can hear the children running in the streets and squealing and as they play. Probably overhear at least one of them saying, "Are we there yet?" They've been traveling. So for some of them, though, this is an annual gathering. They've been here every year. And so when they come together, they begin looking for those familiar faces, those people they saw last year. For others, it's the very first time they've experienced it, and their eyes are wide as they look at every little thing and to wonder about the significance. There's a sense of wonder and awe and excitement. Maybe to help you figure out how that might look, maybe you could put yourself in there in a particular place. Maybe you live in Jericho. Maybe you're an innkeeper there. This is the time of the year that pays the bills throughout the year because it is very crowded. There's so many people, they're staying on the streets. Your inn is full as it is any time of the year. Some of the people made reservations a year ago, knowing they were coming back, and others didn't even think they were going to have to spend the night, and suddenly are finding themselves knocking at your door. For you, this is what harvest is to a farmer. You add to that the festive mood of the people, and you know the chips are going to be larger than usual too. You're so busy taking care of the people that you never make it to Jerusalem, but that's okay because you're always happy to see the people come. Or maybe you want to imagine yourself being one of those people that comes every year. It's a family reunion of sorts. You're seeing your cousins again. You're seeing the children, and you're oohing and awing over how much they've grown or how much they look like your grandmother. It's a family celebration, not just a religious celebration, after all. Or maybe you envision yourself coming as one of those first-time people. You have spent extra time reading the Scriptures. You've lived in lands far enough away that you couldn't afford to get there, and so you saved your money and you read the stories, and now you're hearing them sing those songs, the songs of ascent, the pilgrim songs as they pray the hymns together, the psalms together. And you're just filled with a sense of joy in this holy sacrament of gathering together. Now, I suspect there are also those people who are hawking their wares, just like any other kind of celebration would happen. There's somebody there selling whatever they had the equivalent of T-shirts to commemorate the day or key rings to commemorate it. There's probably somebody there who's offering you special seats they can reserve for you or a tour package that might include lodging in Jerusalem. There's probably somebody there who says, you know what, you probably want to walk from here on foot, so we'll pay to take care of your animals. Or somebody who'll say, I'll provide daycare if you want to go up and back in the same day and your children don't have to make that long road up the hill to Jerusalem. Still others, I suspect, would be sitting by the road asking for alms, preying on the generosity of the pilgrims. They have no intention of leaving Jericho, after all. I mean, they know the crowds will be coming back down the hill next week. To those beggars, this is the best kind of crowd to work with. They're in good spirits. There's extra money to be spent. It's a religious holiday that encourages them to be generous. Couldn't ask for anything better if you're a beggar. Add to that mix, there is another traveler, a preacher this time, who has his own crowd that comes with him. He's making a reputation as a miracle worker. But more recently, there's talk that he might be the Messiah, the son of David. He might be the one who's going to claim the throne and run the Romans out. I don't care which part of that story you really catch yourself in, you know there's a sense of excitement in the air. Expectations are high. And as Jesus walks into the town, he's doing everything he can to keep the expectations of his disciples in check. He has been telling them for weeks, if not months, that he's going to Jerusalem, and the reason he's going is so that he will die. But now they're hearing the voices of the crowd. And they're beginning to wonder if there's not another story that needs to be told. Maybe this is the story of the king who's anointed. The story of a king who's going to rule on David's throne and fulfill all of their hopes. I won't read it today, but if you read on, you'd learn that the very next day, Jesus will go into Jerusalem and the crowds will be waving palms and laying them on the road before him. That's the context for our scripture today, as Jesus enters Jerusalem or Jericho. If you'd like to follow along your pew Bibles, you can find this on page 57 of the New Testament. It's Mark 10, 46 to 52. Jesus and his followers came into Jericho. As Jesus was leaving Jericho, together with his disciples and a sizable crowd, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus, Timaeus' son, was sitting beside the road. When he heard that Jesus of Nazareth was there, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, show me mercy!" Many scolded him, telling him to be quiet. But he shouted even louder, "Son of David, show me mercy!" Jesus stopped and said, "Call him forward." They called the blind man. "Be encouraged, get up, he's calling you." Throwing his coat to the side, he jumped up and came to Jesus. Jesus asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said, "Teacher, I want to see." Jesus said, "Go, your faith has healed you." At once he was able to see, and he began to follow Jesus on the way. This is the word of God. Thanks be to God. Amen. You know, we don't know any specifics about Bartimaeus other than what's in this passage. And in this passage, we know that he's named after his father, Timaeus. We know that he's blind. We know that. We know he's begging for mercy, not necessarily money. And that may not be so obvious to us, but he threw off his coat, which is probably what he would have used to catch the coins that others might be throwing his way. He wasn't after money, he's after mercy. Unlike the man who was born blind, the story we know from John's gospel, it would seem that Bartimaeus has acquired his blindness at some point in life. It may very well be he experienced what was a common disease at that time, in which the eye duct would dry out. And in the arid climate, it would often lead to blindness. It was a dreaded disease that was spread by flies. And so my guess is that when he cries out for mercy, the crowd, including the disciples, not only silence him, they're trying to avoid him. You may not remember that as a blind man, he's not welcome at religious festivals. There are prohibitions against people with disabilities from participating in temple events. A prohibition that has its roots in the Levitical law. According to those laws, anyone with a blemish is not able to participate in the sacrifices. Now, I'm thankful that the church has not upheld those laws. We recognize that people who cannot see are no less human. We know that a person who cannot walk can still know the love of God. We believe that disabilities and deformities are not chosen and are therefore not to be used to exclude people from the life of faith. But poor old Bartimaeus, he didn't grow up in the church of today. He's forced to live in a life that's void of community worship simply because he lives in a different time and a different place. Now, my guess is that his parents provide for him, so he's not in need of money. Otherwise, he probably would stay there collecting alms. He is, however, in need of acceptance. He wants to be welcomed. At the same time, I suspect he can see things that the people around him have no idea about, that they are blind to. It's as if he has insight rather than eyesight. When he calls out to Jesus as Son of David, for example, he may be claiming Jesus is the Messiah. He's naming and perhaps professing something that others are either afraid to say out loud or are unable to see. But it could also be that he knows the story of King David, the throne on which the Messiah would go. King David took into his home Mephibosheth, the crippled descendant of King Saul, and cared for him. It could be that Bartimaeus is simply pleading for mercy, not for himself, but for all of the people who are otherwise outcasts. He's asking for Jesus to remember all of the folks who are left out. But what strikes me in this passage when I read it is how familiar the question Jesus asks sounds. In the paragraph immediately preceding this one, Jesus is speaking to James and John because they want to sit at his right and his left. That conversation began when Jesus asked them, "What do you want me to do for you?" It's the exact same question he asked the blind man. "What do you want me to do for you?" Same question, but notice the difference. The disciples are asking to be seen. Bartimaeus is asking to see. And once he's able to see, Bartimaeus is no longer isolated. He joins the throng on their journey to Jerusalem. He is not only healed, he is included. He is accepted as a peer, albeit one who is able to see things that they never noticed before. I wasn't able to verify the source of a story I came across, but apparently Charles Osgood told the story. It's the story of a man who had been blind for 50 years before the miracles of modern science, using laser surgery, gave him back his sight. In speaking about his newfound eyesight, the man spoke of the amazing varieties of color, those countless shades of green, the brightness of the yellow leaves, the way light reflects off of a window. Where he used to be able to just hear the birds singing, now he marvels at how they fly through the air. He's fascinated by the simple beauty of the clouds as they roll across the sky. Osgood finished the story by making the observation that the man could not see the way we could until he had his surgery, and now we cannot see the way he does. He could not see the way we could until his surgery, and now we can't see the way he does. Maybe the disciples should have asked to be able to see, and Bartimaeus could have asked to be seen. After all, if they'd noticed him on the side of the road, maybe they would have made a place for him in their entourage. He could help them to learn to see in a way they had not seen before. And that leads me to wonder, what is it that we want Jesus to do for us? Would we prefer to have insight or eyesight? And sometimes I don't think the disciples want to see. Sometimes I don't think we want to see. I don't know about you, but every time I go in a city and I see somebody on the side of the street begging, I wish I hadn't seen that. I think sometimes we don't want to see the people who are lonely in our community. We prefer not to see the needs around us because it might require us to do something to meet their needs. Sometimes we prefer not to know. Otherwise, we might feel obligated to do something. sometimes we prefer not to see. But if we close our eyes, we'll never see the beauty of the leaves that are changing color. We'll never marvel at the spectacular sunsets that we've been having. We may not be able to see the road in front of us, and we won't be able to follow Jesus up the hillside to Jerusalem.